Welcome to the IoT podcast show. Today I am joined by Hans Nikol. Hans is both the Vice President and Head of Open Innovation and the Head of IoT Platform at Signify, formerly known as Philips Lighting. Signify are obviously a world leader in lighting, and Hans has over 2 decades of experience within lighting technology and is recognized as a real thought leader within this space. Hans, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. For our listeners then, Hans, who maybe aren't aware of Signify or, of course, Philips Lighting, could you just explain a little bit about your background within the business and your knowledge within lighting technology?
No, sure. So first, maybe my background, I'm a chemist actually by background. I joined Philips Lighting in '95, so quite a while back. And, that was a world when lighting was actually, the industry was quite different. There were 3, large lighting companies, General Electric, Philips, and Osram, then owned by Siemens. Today, there's really only one large lighting company left, that's us. And that company is global. So we really operate in all major geographies. All the other lighting companies from the past, they have veered off to different directions, if you follow them. And this is because the lighting industry in these last more than 2 decades has really undergone quite a dramatic change. I would say at least 2 major waves that battled that industry and, really changed the direction, forever, you could say. The first wave that started in the early 2000s was LED lighting. And it took us probably till 2015, almost 2020, for to have its full impact. And the second wave that we started maybe 5 to 7, 8 years ago is connected lighting, and I'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the introduction. I think just when you talk about LED lighting, there, if I take my sort of IoT professional cap off, there's still this convergence of people moving to LED lighting at home, right? Isn't there? There's still a lot of people that are switching bulbs, are switching their actual lighting infrastructure. So it seems as though this approach is a really wide scale approach and can probably take some time for the average person to adopt. Would you say that was correct?
That's correct. When you started, as said, more than 20 years ago, it was a scientific curiosity, and obviously for a young researcher like myself, it was wonderful to get immersed into that because on the one hand, we changed from really having a light bulb, the old incandescent bulb. There was in essence a vacuum, right? That was and a wire that we heated up to quite high temperature to all of a sudden a semiconductor component. And that component was covered, with what we call a phosphor, so a material that makes out of blue light, white light in essence. And so that changed already from, an industry that was basically built on vacuum tubes more than 100 years ago from Edison, really starting, to a semiconductor industry. That's really a fundamental impact. And just like you saw with silicon, right, where we are today the beneficiaries of having computers everywhere and smartphones, so was the lighting industry, really rocked in its foundation by all of a sudden moving from tubes to semiconductor components. And, today, in the beginning, it took quite a while to educate the market that such a component, would have such a benefit. But, I would say from probably 2008 onwards, the journey was just a straight line to, back then penetration was literally 0%, 2008. And today, I think our last quarter we reported way above 80% of what we ship is LED lighting. So the market penetration is completely there. And, funny enough, back then in 2008, our CEO at that time really predicted in about 10 years, we will go from 0 to literally 80% shipments. And that really happened. Fascinating to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is a great thing in terms of energy consumption and various benefits that it has, right? You touched on it in the original answer, but I think for most of our listeners and what I'm keen to really understand is it's just the concept of connected lighting and what that means. Signify being a world leader in this. Could you just explain in the simplest terms what that actually means for the average consumer?
Before I do that, if you don't mind, because you touched on energy consumption.
Yes, of course.
This would be actually a good for, I think, also our listeners to understand. Obviously, having the benefit of LED lighting also came with a huge benefit for global reduction of energy consumption. And the numbers are really staggering. I mean, before LED was there in 2008 or so, 19% of the world electricity consumption, was for lighting. In 2018, I believe, that's the last time we did an estimate, we're already back to 13%, and it's projected by 2030 we are down to 8%. So from 19 to 8. This is hundreds and hundreds of coal power plants that don't have to be fired up anymore because, all of a sudden a component in the market consumes a lot less energy. So I think I have to say personally, if you ask me what I'm really proud of is that, this industry could contribute so much to reducing, the carbon footprint.
Yeah. I mean, it is staggering, isn't it? And if you think about it, the change is fundamental, and it's quite heartwarming to know that 80% of the shipments, as you mentioned, are now LED based, which is significant compared to where it would have been a decade ago. So just on that note, then, so a lot of what you're doing these days are based around connected lighting and also sort of Light-Fidelity. Could you just explain what that means, Hans?
Yes. So as I said, LED is basically beyond us. Now connected lighting and new applications of light is now basically the next journey we are on. So one of these applications, indeed, Light-Fidelity that you mentioned, is really an absolutely fascinating one, because what it means is you can really communicate with light. And, our CEO has really put a stake in the ground to say that Signify should be a company to explore that vision of having lighting really communicate to people in the end of the day. So what is it all about? Well, you have lighting usually on the ceiling in a good distance, and so it is also a good means of using it as a communication network. So, and you need, indeed, as you mentioned before, you first need to connect these lights, and then what you can do is you can overlay a frequency that can be picked up by a receiver, and then between the frequency of the light that emits and the receiver, let's say your smartphone, you can start communicating. And this is fascinating in a way because, of course, today there's Wi-Fi and there's 4G and 5G using RF frequencies, but lighting has a much broader spectrum in principle, right, to be used. So we believe moving forward that Li-Fi or Light-Fidelity has a role to play. It won't substitute, obviously, the existing communication protocols, but it might augment them in a very good way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of talk around that at the moment, and clearly quite pioneering, isn't it, in terms of the capabilities. What does it mean for the average consumer, the person at home? What does this potential technology mean for them? How can they use that, to further enrich their lives? Because at the moment, a lot of people have smart homes. They use various connected devices that they're able to talk to and control their lights, etc. But how can this take that forward, perhaps?
Well, if we stay on this Li-Fi side, what we see is first we believe the communication will start in special applications, like it's almost always the case. And one of the clear advantages of Li-Fi is security. So if you imagine today, if you're in your home and you have Wi-Fi, or in an apartment building, your neighbor can still see your Wi-Fi, network in his neighboring apartment. Now, if you haven't secured it well with a password or by other means, then there's an easy way of tapping in. And while maybe for private use that is a nuisance, certainly for professional applications is often a lifeline to have a secure network. And Li-Fi, because light is really shielded by the walls, you can really secure it physically extremely well. So we believe that feature is one that will be quite beneficial initially, maybe for professional users, but eventually also for consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic. But I'd love to see the developments of that in the future. One of the key technologies that is in use in IoT in general, and a lot of devices use it, is Zigbee. And obviously the whole mesh network inside of Zigbee and what it can do. Could you talk a little bit about the use of Zigbee within some of the products that Signify is developing, and why, as a standard, it is used in-house?
I think that's a great question, insofar that it really points to the beginning of the journey when we saw LED lighting is going its way, and now we think about connectivity. Then the question becomes, what protocol can I use? At the time, and we again go back to 2012, maybe 2011. Certainly there was Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi itself, those chips at the time, they would use a lot of energy. So, it defeats the purpose. You save all this energy with LED lighting, and then, you use it up again by making it connected with Wi-Fi. So we were looking, again, that's at the time, at a protocol that was a lot more, frugal in its resources. And Zigbee turned out to be an excellent protocol for that. So on the one hand, as said, it was not Wi-Fi, meaning, you could deploy a Zigbee network next to Wi-Fi without much interference. And obviously, it was a lot more frugal in its resources and energy consumption. Again, at the time, in the meantime, Wi-Fi also has, of course, moved on to be a lot more energy efficient. But so that's where we started this journey and really equip, consumer lighting and also professional lighting with Zigbee chips. And not only is the protocol itself pretty well maintained. Also, you mentioned mesh networking, means every lighting node, let's say in your home, will basically be used to proliferate the network to its neighbors. So that means with a few nodes or a few light bulbs in your home, you have a really stable Zigbee network. I think this is probably best embodied if you use Philips Hue, which I think many of our listeners, I would assume, know, which is, I think, today probably one of the most prominent connected lighting products in the market. They use a Zigbee network. And, if I have a lot of Hue myself at home, but if you, put it in, you start maybe in your hallway or in your kitchen, and then, you need a bridge, because Zigbee is then basically produced by that Hue bridge. You really create a very stable network. So there is, I have to say, whenever I switch the light on or I use my app, or, you can couple it now with Alexa, it just works. I have to say that's the nice thing, because, it is really a separate entity that's just devoted and dedicated to lighting. So I think this is a great feature that is certainly very, I would assume, beneficial for a home user, but you can also imagine we also roll it out in professional, in office environments, in hotels and so on, where, it's even more mandatory, right, that the light goes on when you want to go it on, or, you dim and it has to dim at this very moment. So stability and let's say the independence of external influences is a strong feature of a Zigbee mesh network.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. We've got to the point now where, without being able to communicate with devices like Alexa and other competing products, that we really would be taking a backward step. And mesh networking has got to the point with adaptive Wi-Fi that really there shouldn't be dead spots in a house anymore, and that combined with adoption of high-speed fiber internet to many homes, and seeing speeds now readily accessible of 900 megabits and more to the consumer, which 5 years ago would be very difficult to get as a business, let alone on a leased line or something coming into the premises. It's really evolved where this is, because of course with a mesh, you may lose slight throughput as you connect more nodes and what have you, but that combination of having that higher speed coming in to the house, combined with all of these devices connected, I think is absolutely fantastic. We spoke a little bit earlier about energy usage, and I know that we had a short conversation before we started filming about some previous podcasts and really waste, right, and how and how certain companies are producing IoT solutions to eliminate waste. And I think this is something that you wanted to touch on, right? Specifically with how this technology and how the involvement here could help. Could you talk a little bit about that, Hans?
Yeah, so obviously, again, the starting point is, that we can avoid, first of all, a lot of electricity consumption.
Yes.
Our company has really taken on also that we as a company become carbon neutral. And since last September, actually, we're one of the very few companies completely carbon neutral already. So I'm very glad to say. But obviously, it's one thing, as a company to be carbon neutral, but also the other one is we want to make impact with our products. And I think that's indeed what you and I talked about before. And one, I think, good example is if you take, for example, food production, right? Just take vegetables, that you buy at the groceries every day. From where they are produced to until, they land on your table, the average waste is 40%. That is really, if you look at, different reports, you always find that kind of number back. And that's a tremendous amount of waste, right? From where you grow to where you eat it. And, one of the trends is certainly to produce also food closer to home, basically, sometimes even in the supermarkets. We call this like vertical farming. There are many startups in that area, and we connect to a lot of them. There's a lot of activity actually in the UK. Which is quite exciting. And, lighting, again, has a strong contribution there, because assume you grow vegetables in a warehouse or, directly almost in the supermarket, you need lighting. And we have a large division on what we call horticulture lighting, where we bring the right light to the vegetables to grow under almost ideal conditions. And, while that in itself is already, because that lighting is also very energy savvy, is a nice thing. But, we avoid indirectly then by doing so all this waste of transport.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic, some of the initiatives there. You talk about some companies in the UK. We know of some, we work with some who are involved with vertical farming, and the sheer amount that can be produced without requiring so much land is really phenomenal. But of course, a lot of this hinges upon the correct lighting, the correct photosynthesis that needs to be taking place during the crop cycle, right? Yeah. So it's very interesting. Something I wanted to touch on as well is obviously the pandemic has been quite a driver for new technologies in general, and it's really kind of changed everything in how people perceive technology, use technology, and how we interact with it. One of the things that I'm curious about is UVC lighting, actually, and how that can be deployed, and what that can be done post-pandemic as well, in terms of both within a health and safety point of view, but other use cases. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, Hans.
No, sure. First, let me say, obviously, we discussed just before this podcast, right, that the pandemic has, I think, hit us all extremely hard, right? And I have to say, I'm also in that sense proud that, we, as a company, we tried to first put, the life of our employees as number one priority, and the security and safety. But obviously beyond that, also try to contribute, right, to, reduce the impact and the spread of the pandemic. And as you say, indeed, UV lighting for disinfection is a powerful contributor to simply reduce, viral spread in places where we all congregate or get together. And so we looked at this space obviously since early last year, and see where could we make an impact. And one is where you could basically say, I directly illuminate surfaces to disinfect, but then usually because it's UVC light, people must not be present. So you can do this in the absence of people. And there are quite a number of products that we support, like robots, etc., that go into cleaning cycles, let's say in hospitals or in hotels or many places when people are not present. And then you simply disinfect spaces, the surfaces. And the other part is, can we find a solution when people are present? And so there's one that we currently, start installing, which is what we call upper air disinfection, where you have basically what we call a luminaire on the ceiling that's radiates UVC light. And by air convection, the air that might contain a virus, moves up and is disinfected in a very short time, and then falls down again, and then you basically over time with actually a fairly short time you get clean air. We have actually shown in a test with Boston University that the real COVID virus can be disinfected in seconds actually. By UVC light of a certain dose. Now, if you translate that, as said, into real applications, that means, that if you have a robot disinfecting surfaces, or what I mentioned with upper air, you can disinfect a room, to a very high level within minutes, sometimes 15 minutes or so if you have a room, and this is quite substantial. Now, you mentioned also, obviously, you have the current pandemic. To many customers that we have talked, they already look beyond and say, while hopefully with vaccination, we might get over it. But they say, if we have learned one thing, we need to secure our buildings, we need to secure our environment, make it safe for potential future threats. So I think this is a portfolio that we believe, will be there to stay.
Yeah, I mean, it's really staggering, isn't it? Because one of the last things I was going to talk to you about is the future of lighting industry, but I think we're touching on this now, right? The fact that, UV lighting can, combined with a smart building approach. And when we talk about smart buildings, everything from utilities, heating, lighting, of course, to airflow. And that's really interesting, the fact that you can use convection-based systems to take air, pull it through a UV sanitization process, and reduce, again, from a consumption point of view, the renewables, liquids, and surface cleaners and what have you, which are clearly have an associated cost with them, and do it in a clean and less cluttered way. And certainly that must be something that businesses would be looking to do and try and implement for the well-being and security of their staff moving forward. I mean, it's not touching on the fact that there's going to be more home working in the future and what have you, but I think it's widely considered now that businesses will have a base, albeit people will come and go as they please. But it's very interesting to know that technology is there. And do you see that as something that's going to be taking shape pretty soon, and then a lot more larger organizations would be looking for systems like this? Is it happening today, Hans?
Yeah, so one maybe application that we all enjoy already today is your drinking water, because and even the wastewater, because that is already treated today in many places with UV lighting, to get the germs out. But as you said, now moving to spaces, it's obviously a slow process, because you can imagine you need a lot of certification by government bodies, standardization. So it's the typical process, to get it eventually to building codes. But we see quite some bold first customers that say, look, I want to go beyond that and just get started. And we have a number of examples for supermarkets that say, let's just try it out, see how it works, and see the measurable effect. And so this is where we are now, and not only us as Signify, but obviously our other colleagues in the lighting industry and in the adjacent industries, to really penetrate that market on all these angles, basically, of where disinfection can be applied.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said it before on this show, but and it's a phrase that I've used a lot, but within difficulty lies opportunity, right? And I don't mean that just in a commercial sense. I mean that in a true well-being, health and safety perspective, for good. And I'm a big fan of tech for good in general, in the fact that we can create solutions that enrich people's lives and secure them against vulnerabilities. be that made, a pandemic or other aspects. In your opinion, Hans, and of course, I don't want you to reveal too many trade secrets, of course, and I'm sure you can't. But what can we expect to see in the future in terms of lighting technology, aside obviously of UV tech used to sanitize air? Is there anything that's on the horizon at the moment that perhaps could be really interesting for our listeners to hear about?
Well, I would say, for me, frankly, next to what the examples we have talked, is really if you just forward and see what connected lighting can do into the future. If you imagine that you have these powerful sensor networks that are powered by, it can be powered by connected lighting, and what they enable downstream, the data that can be collected and then can be combined, with data from other sources. I think that is something where I personally see a lot of, very beneficial innovation coming along, and we have just started. So if you look at the penetration of, where we are today in any of these spaces, smart city, industry 4.0, there's so much to be gained by simply improving processes, indoor, outdoor, by having sensors around. Obviously, we have to be, have to have high standards on security, which we do. But the best is yet to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Hans, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you ever so much. I know your time is super precious, and it's been really insightful. I'm really keen to see what happens in the future of lighting technology and certain products that may come out from the technology that you guys are developing at the moment and are researching. So perhaps in the future, in a year or two's time, it would be lovely to get you back on the show and start to talk about where things are at that point. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, for your time as well.
You're welcome.